and welcome to the Weekly Defense Podcast, Shepherd's Media weekly podcast dedicated to news from the defense sector and expert analysis on defense procurement and military technology. I'm Alex Valenti, your host, and also with me today in this virtual newsroom, we have Air Editor Tim Martin, Senior Land Reporter Tim Fish, and Shepherd's new entry, Harry Lai. In case you've missed last week's episode, Harry has just joined the team as the new Senior Naval Reporter. Hi guys, and welcome back.
Hi Alex, good to be back.
Good evening.
Hi. Oh yeah, it's evening for you, Tim.
Always.
And Harry, how are you doing? How are your first weeks in Shepherd?
Yeah, good so far. It's good to be back. Not been fired yet, so I must be doing something right.
Well, certainly you were good last week in the episode, so we expect nothing less this week. So, before diving into our conversation, let's have a quick look at the program for this 28th episode. And I'm actually quite excited because this week we're going to be taking a little break from our usual format where we cover all things air, land, and sea. And instead, we're going to be delving into the fascinating realm of space. We'll be starting with the UK, which is yet to publish its space strategy, even though we're getting close to 4 months since the integrated review was released, highlighting a substantial investment in this domain. We'll then have a look at space strategies elsewhere in the world, going as far as Australia. In the second part of the program, we're going to be keeping our focus on space as we listen to Tim Martin catching up with Alan Antrobus, Director Military Space at Airbus, during the Spacecom Expo event in Farnborough last week. This being said, as usual, let's have a quick look at the headlines for this week in defense. And we start in the Pacific region, where New Zealand's Defense Secretary, Peeni Henare, announced this week a post-COVID redraft of the country's defense capability plan. The new Labour-led government, established in 2020, has said that the country will not cut back the plan, but rather review it, ensuring it meets the government's priorities. While programs already underway should be safe from cuts, such as the frigate systems upgrade and the network-enabled army, the same cannot be said for future unapproved programs. Moving over to South America next, the Venezuelan army took part in high-profile parades in early July. The events showed that while Venezuela cannot afford to invest in new equipment capabilities due to tight defense budget, the army is willing to support its land forces refurbishing existing fleets of Western-supplied vehicles. Equipment that will undergo modernization or repairing include AMX-13 and AMX-30 tanks, BAE Scorpion 90 armored reconnaissance vehicles, 4x4 light vehicles, and machine guns. And for our last top stories, we come back here in Europe, where Germany and Norway have finally signed a contract for 6 Type 212 common design submarines. The 5.5 billion euros contract with ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems and in collaboration with Norwegian company Kongsberg should see the beginning of construction for the first boat in 2023, with deliveries expected in 2029 for Norway and early 2030 for Germany. This concludes the headlines for this week, and now it's time to join everyone in the conversation and talk about space and space strategies. So, since we finished with Europe, perhaps let's start with you, Tim Martin, as I think last week you published an article about the fact that the UK has yet once again delayed its space strategy, isn't that right?
Yeah, so it's not the first time that the UK has delayed the strategy. As you mentioned kind of in your intro, that this was originally or previously going to happen before the integrated review, and then there was a commitment to have it published alongside the integrated review, and then there was also a commitment when I wrote previously on the story to Q2 of 2021. So effectively that's why I was chasing on this as a kind of an update, and so that target has been missed, and the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, they didn't actually offer any explanation as to the reason behind the delay, but said that the National Space Strategy will be published in due course. The MOD asked me to contact BES, which is the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So, you can read into that a couple of things, that the MOD don't really want it to be, on their watch effectively, and yeah, BES don't really want to talk about it either. So the bottom line on it is that we don't actually know the reason why it's being delayed. You could think potentially that there is an issue with funding perhaps, or how they're balancing requirements. But that again is just almost speculation, pretty much on my part. It's just having looked at these types of things before and knowing how the defense world works. I guess it's possibly one answer, but that isn't official by any stretch. But having said that, potentially now we're talking maybe towards the end of this year, you would have to suspect in terms of a reasonable estimate as to when the National Space Strategy is released in the UK.
Reasonable expectation. Let's see. I mean, they're already almost a year late, so hopefully by the end of this year.
Yeah, I'm trying to be kind there.
Yeah, exactly. I'm assuming this must have some sort of impact on the UK space defense industry, right? Have you managed to get some information from them, their reactions?
Yeah, so I mean, I did talk to people. So this was at Space Expo. Again, as you'd mentioned, the coverage in terms of a new sense. That's the whole reason why this story came out, really. But yeah, I spoke to people on the show floor, basically, about why does it matter and so forth, and what the reaction is to the delay. And actually, to be fair to industry, they were more keen to see a strategy that, as kind of one of the sources mentioned, that would be coherent and has the full weight of government behind it. Instead of seeing something that's rushed. And I think, though, that the sense is that in terms of what they want to see from it does sound like kind of corporate speak, but in some senses they definitely want to see protecting and defending kind of UK space aspirations, encourage the right behaviours in space, and a huge focus, of course, on the UK supply chain. Probably none of that is a surprise, but I think it's obviously worth noting, where industry are and how they see things. But certainly there is a vibrant SME kind of sector, particularly in the UK when it comes to space, and obviously the big OEMs, the likes of Airbus, Raytheon UK, and Lockheed Martin Space in the UK as well, are obviously some of the big players in the domain itself. But I think beyond the kind of suggestions as to what might be in the strategy, I think the UK, when it comes to space, has a bigger issue, and I know that Tim Fish is keen to talk about that and add a bit of colour to the conversation. So I don't want to steal his thunder, but so Tim, do you want to just kind of go into that and talk a little bit about it?
Oh, well, I was just going to say that the reason for the delay has got to be the funding, right? I mean, when it comes down to, we can't publish this yet, it's because there's a lot of money involved, and how they're going to spend it is the key, really. What you were saying about how industry's already been affected by ultimately what it was the Brexit decision. The reason why you needed a space strategy is because UK has been kicked out of the EU's Galileo program, which was like the major program that was going to deliver a global navigation satellite system like the US GPS system and the Russian GLONASS system. So the UK is not involved in that anymore. So industry, like companies you mentioned, like Airbus, have lost a lot of contracts because as Galileo gets developed by the EU further, they've mandated that any work on the program's got to be done by companies in an EU member state. And obviously that's not the case anymore. I mean, Theresa May, when she was Prime Minister, announced that the UK was withdrawing completely from the Galileo program back in October 2018. So the damage to industry on that particular program's already happened. That all the companies have lost the contracts or they've had to move facilities to go to Europe. So looking ahead for this strategy to come in, industry needs direction about what's going to happen. If the UK wants to replace Galileo with its own system, this is where the money comes in, because you're looking at a program for UK only system from the region of £3 to £5 billion. That's just for the new constellation. Probably another $1 billion a year to operate it, and overall the life cost of the entire program probably be about 10 billion. So that's a lot of money on top of everything that's already been spent on the financial crisis and on COVID and everything else. So you can understand why there's a bit of delay. I mean, there's already a £92 million study into options for a UK-only global navigation satellite system. So that was supposed to conclude last year. So that might be a part of the strategy. I'm not quite sure. So they might be tied together in some way. It's led by the UK Space Agency, which is a civilian organisation under the Department of Business. So that's why we have this kind of dual kind of responsibility there, isn't it? Because it's largely a civilian thing, right? Because GPS is used by civilian phones and everything, isn't it? So the military part of it is just a small section of it, which is the encrypted bit, which the military uses. But the rest of it's like a civilian used system, isn't it? So I suppose that's why you have that dual hat approach to it.
Right. I mean, clearly, and Galileo is obviously a huge headache. But you're right in terms of trying to unpick what might be in the space strategy, or kind of that difference between the civil sector and defence. I mean, even trying to ask industry, hold their hands over the fire and ask them, what is actually going to be in this, or what are they expecting, and beyond kind of talking about those priorities and those generalities that you might obviously expect. It's very hard to know what might be in the space strategy. But I think, though, certainly there will be conversations to be had, not only with what you're mentioning, the headache from Galileo, but also the Skynet enduring capability, so SKEC, as it's known, because Skynet is obviously the UK's kind of military communications, the beating heart of military communications, really. And so the UK have committed to enduring capability to have a program that is basically the next generation of strategic communications. And industry are kind of waiting to see what the requirements will be, and from 2022. So there's 18 months to go before kind of decisions are made on that one. So, there has been an RFI released previously. And so those companies that I'd mentioned previously, the big OEMs, are kind of lining up to see what will happen with that. But it will actually be interesting, I think, to see if there is any firm requirements laid out as regards the enduring capability, and particularly as we are so close to a deadline in terms of sourcing winners for that competition and contractors.
Do you think that the heart of the strategy will be not just what programs you want to deliver on, but also the extent to which those capabilities have to be delivered by a UK company to deliver a sovereign capability? Because the UK's got a lot of good companies that deliver payloads and for satellites, all the equipment that goes on the satellites. What they lack is a launch capability as well. So that's something else possibly to watch out for.
Yeah, I mean, but beyond the OEM and beyond whoever provides the hardware and software, then obviously, yes, you'll have to be talking about who will do the systems integration and those types of things. So yeah, you can say we expect that to be clear, but that might not be the case. And should also mention that in Spacecom Expo, rather, I should say, there was due to be a keynote from the MOD. It was cancelled. So that, I thought, would have given a very clear indication as where the MOD are on next steps, and what their thinking is on space. And we know, of course, that next week we'll see UK Space Command open at RAF High Wycombe. So it's an important couple of weeks, and it was just a shame that there wasn't someone on the ground last week who from the MOD who kind of would have spoken up for the organisation and kind of laid out priorities.
I can imagine there must be some frustration from industry, right? So obviously you've had the Galileo. We knew we've been out of that for quite some time, and now you're waiting for the space strategy to come out, and industry's kind of still picking up pieces here and there with these programs that are already existing, but without a major strategy. I must imagine they must be left kind of scratching their heads to an extent, wondering what comes next.
Yeah, I mean that's very true. But I mean, and definitely you'd think that behind the scenes there is a certain level of frustration. I mean, just from the interactions between journalists and industry that I've had, kind of on the record, you don't really get that. Now that's kind of polished spokespeople, of course, knowing what to say and what not to say. But you'll hear things similar to, we want to see continued growth in the space sector and commitment on that front by the UK and the MOD. And yes, I'm sure that is genuine, and that's exactly what is beneficial for industry, and it's absolutely a priority for them. But you're not getting the sense of, well, actually, how has your business suffered over the course of the last 18 to 26 months, not only due to COVID, but also the delays that have meant that funding decisions haven't been taken and so forth. It was interesting actually to hear someone from Kinetic tell me that what is actually of interest to them when it comes to the space strategy will be funding mechanisms, how those play out. Now, he didn't really go into any great detail about any specifics behind that, but certainly that seems to be one key area where industry will be focusing in on once the space strategy is released, to see, if there's any significant changes in play.
Just one thing that came up yesterday was on Twitter. Actually, it was Air Chief Marshal Sir Mike Wigston was speaking at the Global Air Chiefs Conference, and his tweets have been made fun of because of some of the bits of speeches that he's made. But one of the bits was that he said, as a priority, we'll establish a space cloud to harvest the terabytes of space-derived data across a truly borderless domain, while establishing a space-based intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance program to deliver a sovereign multi-spectral constellation. So that might give a bit of a clue into what, on the military side, particularly with the RAF, what they're looking to deliver.
I'm sure that can be translated into plain English somewhere.
Yeah.
Yep. So thanks very much, guys, for this really interesting insights on the UK. And I know this, again, as always, so much more we could say. But I know we've promised our listeners that we would also have a look at what's going on down under. So, Tim, do you have some news of what's going on in for the Australian space strategy? I mean, I know that there's a new Australian Space Agency which was established in 2018. So, how are things going with that and over there?
Yeah, they're coming from a completely different position than the UK or even the US or anyone else. They're completely reliant on overseas providers for their space-based communications and surveillance and everything. So they're trying to use this new Australian Space Agency to drive investment into some new civilian, but also military systems as well. They've got a couple of programs on the way, which have got, again, like the UK, it's kind of driven on a joint commercial, civilian and military baseline, in the same way that Department for Business in the UK is leading it. But one of the programs they're pushing forwards on the defence side is being funded by the Defence Innovation Hub. And they've had policies going back as far back as 2016 to try and push the space domain. So they've kind of recognised this for quite a while, and they're doing it on their own as well. So the first one is sort of called DEF 799, which is a sort of 3 to 4 billion Australian dollar program, which is going to provide some more commercial and sovereign geospatial satellite imagery. That's going to last through to sort of 2039. So it's quite a long running program that's going to kind of deliver more capabilities for what they need in terms of imagery. They've got other satellites going up at the moment as well. There's 2 projects, Project Buccaneer, which is put up a couple of CubeSats. One small one was put up in 2017 as a sort of test device, and they've got another one going up probably next year, a slightly larger one in 2022, a 6U class CubeSat, which has got more sensors. And then the Royal Australian Air Force is also putting up satellites with this M series of satellites to do more testing of sensors and everything in the short term. So they're kind of pushing their way forwards into developing the sovereign space domain. In the short term, it's just about delivering more comms and more imagery, and then they're going to start pushing ahead with putting up their own satellites. we did cover the EW side of it under the program, which was a miniaturized orbital electronic warfare sensor system, which I spoke to the company doing that project called Duke Systems. That's on our website under our space microsite for people to listen to. So that's quite interesting how they're pushing ahead with that particular capability from Australia as well, highlighting sort of the importance of the space domain in a lot of different areas for the military.
Right. Well, I mean, it makes sense because I think also it was in one of your articles that I saw that obviously they're, one of their focus is the Indian Ocean. So there's going to be also a satellite, for ensuring connections. And I think I know we said we weren't going to focus on any particular domain, but I think it's interesting to bring it back to naval, if anything, because it's often forgotten how important naval, SATCOM can be for the naval domain. Again, for Australia when they go so far away from home. And I think also, I think Harry also had some news about SATCOMs and the naval domain. Perhaps we're back in the UK here, aren't we, Harry?
Yeah, so SATCOMs and kind of anything space is pretty vital to the Navy's ambitions. In a recent interview, the First Sea Lord here, Admiral Tony Radakin, said that the Royal Navy's reach was from subsurface to space, so maybe stepping on the RAF's toes a little bit there. But they've got quite a big push for forward basing and obviously unmanned and kind of autonomous systems. And so with those systems, you need reliable communications, especially if you're operating them from far away. You need a reliable satellite link if you're doing, say, uncrewed mine hunting in the Gulf and you're operating it from the UK. And it's not all doom and gloom on the contracts front. So in recent months, the Royal Navy issued a contract for satellite geolocation of radio signals to kind of spot nefarious vessels and find where they are. And Airbus was recently given a contract for space maritime surveillance of the UK's EEZ. So it's using radars to kind of, again, keep an eye on what people are up to.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's key. And thanks for those news, Harry. And I think also we had also promised our listeners that we'd be looking into other country than the UK and Australia. So I had a quick look. I mean, I'm no expert by any means on the space domain, but at the French strategy, which was published in 2019. And I had this tiny moment of pride when I saw that the US has its Space Force, which was established in December 2019. And I realized that the French did the same, but actually in September 2019. So we now have a Commandement Interarmé de l'Espace, so a joint Space Army command. So it's still in its early stages. That's fair enough, and they're still bringing in different commands from the French forces. So it's there's a lot of bureaucracy there to get through, a lot of hoops to jump through. I'm certain, but it's making a good headway. So I'm not usually much of a French hello pride kind of moment, but for once, I have to say I am. I don't know if any of you guys have something to add about the US. I mean, other than we know that we all follow closely what's going on. Just
quickly on France as well, they did rename the Air Force to the Air and Space Force. So it's another tick in the space box.
Yes, exactly. We're ticking boxes, but I'm sure we're doing more than that, or at least I hope we are.
Well, just on the US, the showing kind of highlighting the importance of space and what it can offer in terms of countering future threats is that space is the key to defending against hypersonic glide vehicle and hypersonic missiles. There is the US is pushing ahead with a hypersonic and ballistic tracking space sensor system called HBTSS, which is a way of tracking hypersonic missiles by implementing a constellation of low Earth orbit satellites that are all interconnected and kind of able to transmit data seamlessly from one to another. This constellation will be able to much better track hypersonic glide vehicles than existing sensor platforms can at the moment. And they've got quite a rapid program in place where L3 and Northrop Grumman are been down selected to do some demonstrations in the short term, but eventually across sort of 3 different phases stretching out to 2026, aim to put up about 1,000 satellites with payloads that can all communicate with each other and spot these vehicles. It's going to kind of fit into their existing air defence networks, but it's essential to have that particular component in there because it's the only way you can track hypersonic missiles. Hypersonic glide vehicles operate just within the atmosphere, so existing sensors that detect ballistic missiles won't be able to see them. So that's why you need a system like HBTSS using LEO satellites. And that's kind of just emphasises the point going ahead about why you need a good space strategy, why France, why everyone's getting in on this game, Australia, they need to be up there.
I think on a general note as well, you mentioned kind of the LEO satellites there. And one thing that's quite apparent whenever you talk to governments and businesses about space is that it's filling up quite quickly, quicker than it ever has before. And there's quite a need for some rules and general norms to be decided because at the current rate, everyone's building LEO constellations and sending satellites up. And sooner rather than later, we're going to kind of approach a situation where if you're last, there's just not going to be any room left for your constellation.
Yeah, when I was looking at Australia, a lot of their work at the moment is just putting up satellites and putting up ground sensors to check where there's space. There's so much space debris out there that they need to put up satellites to scan the space horizon to see what else is up there, so that there's no chance of putting a constellation up that's going to get smashed up by anything else that's flying around. I mean, I think I read sort of there's space debris out there that's flying around at 30,000 kilometers a second or something. It's whatever it is, very fast. So it's basically if anything gets hit by that, it's finished, right? So
finding space in space is very meta. I think we're through the looking glass now, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's getting quite busy out there, and as you said, there's plenty going on. But unfortunately, we are running out of time for this week. But thank you very much, guys, for these really interesting insights on different defense strategies. Well, space defense strategies. And for our listeners, as always, you can check these and more stories, previous episodes of the podcast, video content, and more by visiting our website, shepherdmedia.com/news. We will now go into a short break, but stay with us as we will be back in a few moments for Tim Martin's conversation with Airbus last week at Spacecom in Farnborough.
Artificial intelligence is rapidly changing the world in which we live. Evidence of artificial intelligence is all around us and will have profound implications on everyday life in the decades to come. In the military world, artificial intelligence technologies are having a similarly massive effect and are beginning to change the face of modern warfare. Artificial intelligence and machine learning applications promise to enhance productivity, reduce user workload, and operate more quickly than humans. But this doesn't come without its challenges. How easy is it for an adversary to fool artificial intelligence systems? How well do AI systems cope with a chaotic and ever-changing conflict? And how will the human in the loop oversee AI systems on a battlefield swarming with autonomous assets? The Artificial Intelligence on the Battlefield podcast dives into these issues and more. How will artificial intelligence reshape the future of warfare? Created by Shephard Studio, in partnership with our sponsor Sistel, the Artificial Intelligence on the Battlefield podcast is coming soon on shepherdmedia.com/news or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Shephard's our editor, Tim Martin, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Alan Antropos, Director of Military Space at Airbus Defence and Space, as we discuss the company's perspective on the changing nature of the space domain, military communications, future threats, and big-ticket items like Skynet 6A. Alan, thanks so much for joining us, and welcome to the podcast.
Good morning.
So just to kick off at a general level, how does Airbus assess the current state of the military space currently, both from a technological and competitive standpoint?
I think it's a period of change. lots of new entrants to the market, which is keeping the more traditional primes such as ourselves and our competitors, looking forward to ensure that we can respond to new technology, to bring them on board to meet, the customer's demand. And the customer themselves, I think, are becoming more demanding. They want the latest technology. They want to be able to incorporate it into their wider architectures, and they want to be able to utilize, new innovative ideas that either come, within our technology division or are being created, by the wider ecosystem.
And we're talking only a few months after the UK Space Command has been formed. Have you had any discussions on that front, or with the likes of Harv Smythe, the head of the Space Directorate at the MOD?
Yeah, so we're speaking to Harv at the Space Directorate and Goddard at Space Command about what are they looking for from industry. We have a very successful relationship with the MOD through the PFI with Skynet, and although that period is coming to an end within the next 18 months, ideally we're now looking at what a future partnership might look like, not just within military SATCOM, but in military space, in the sort of the wider considerations. How might they be able to do, ISR? How will that relate to, what does a future architecture look like? A real drive, I think, from them to bring some coherence to space. And I think Harv has been very successful in getting space on the agenda with the MOD outside of SATCOM. And now looking forward for Space Command, I think, to bring that sort of focused effort for all of the MOD.
Okay, and in terms of Skynet, I mean, effectively it is the beating heart of UK military communications. Airbus is under contract for Skynet 6A with, as I understand it, the programme moving towards a critical design review currently, and then beyond that, the launch in 2025. Can you discuss a little bit about the differences between Skynet 5 and Skynet 6?
Yeah, so, the MOD looked to, in effect, recreate Skynet 5. We had a look at that, and clearly there were some enhancements that, we wanted to be able to make, because some of the technology inside the subsystems had moved on. So we've upgraded, internally where required. We've looked at different types of propulsion. So we're going to use some electric propulsion, which will give us, a better ability, or defensive better ability, to be able to manage the satellite once it's launched and in position. And it's, I guess, the interim sort of solution that ourselves and the MOD have come to as we await, for Skynet EC, which is enduring capability, which is the next major milestone for the MOD.
Okay, and in terms of the direction of travel on that front, is there many questions still left open, or what's Airbus' understanding of what happens after 18 months?
So I think, and again, I think to put it into context with the creation of Space Command, the MOD are now asking, well, where will space fit within their wider sort of multi-domain integration? How will space support the combat cloud? And I suppose what we see is space providing a backbone architecture. So utilizing, new military assets in GEO, combining that with a mixture of, commercial assets, perhaps say in the lower Earth orbit. So how will we be able to mix that? How will we be able to include, the likes of Zephyr, so the high altitude pseudo satellites? How will that then link, the air domain to, the Navy? How will that link it to the Army? And making sure that, the users can capitalize on, new technology and antenna development, whereby they can sort of move seamlessly across domains, being able to speak to geo satellites one moment and then potentially, LEO in the next sort of iteration.
And just as you mentioned, Zephyr, then it was in Australia some time ago, and there was an accident of some sort. And I understand Airbus have since fixed that issue, very confident in the capability, of course. Can you tell us a little bit on latest developments and through COVID, what's been happening with it?
Okay, so the team have deployed back out to the Yuma Proving Ground in the United States in a COVID-compliant process. And we're starting new flight trials, and we're hoping that we will be able to report, the outcome of those at the back end of the summer.
Okay, and just to move back into what's happening in terms of UK space, did want to pick up on the National Space Strategy. Was originally, or was hoped that it would be published in Q2. Before that, it was expected to be aligned with the integrated review. That hasn't happened yet, but what is the latest as you understand it?
Well, I think clearly it's disappointing that the national strategy hasn't been released. We're expecting it to be, released now, I think in the autumn. And that's going to be good, I think, for the country, because it will allow us to focus on, the areas that I think are critical to success. So building on, I think, what is already a very successful telecommunications sector within the country, important to take that forward, but then to capitalise on, other areas such as, creating maybe a national space-based optical system. I think it's something we remain one of the only, I think the only country in the P5 that doesn't have its own national constellation, which hopefully would, give us some direction of travel. And then, looking at new areas, such as how do we support, climate change? How do we, nurture what is a really growing, I think, SME market in terms of new technology, new startups, and how do we capitalise on all of that?
And can you foresee any surprises in the strategy itself, or there's been mention of funding difficulties, and perhaps that's why it's been delayed and so forth. So can it be as ambitious as maybe the UK MOD would like?
On the ambition of the senior leadership, whether that's the politicians or the senior civil servants or military, with then the funding profile that they get given, whether that's on a national basis or on a sort of a defence basis, as clearly they are competing against all the other things that a country wants to be able to do. I would like, I suppose, to see a real concerted effort to work closely, I think, with UK industry to be able to achieve some of their stated ambitions in potentially a more cost-effective and managed way, rather than what can still be quite an adversarial element, whereby government sets down its requirements and then seeks to do competitions, which sort of drain resources, I think, across a range of companies, rather than thinking, well, how can we do this in a partnership, with the whole sort of industrial sector.
Okay, then on that front, was there anything in particular of interest from DCIS?
Yeah, so we've had some, I think, early discussions with MOD on, this new approach, which in some ways I think we welcome. It will be interesting to see how that can filter through the system. I think the political intent is clear in terms of trying to generate, a different approach in terms of partnering, looking for long-term partners. But that's going to still, I think, require a step change, from the commercial elements with inside MOD and also with inside sort of wider government.
Just to touch on future threats, there has been consistently a lot of talk around China testing anti-satellite weapons and the difficulties that could bring from a security perspective. Potentially, it could target satellites I guess, theoretically in low and high orbits. So will countering that threat have to happen kind of sooner rather than later?
I think it's sort of happening today. I mean, you're right that the threat clearly exists in low Earth orbit. We have seen, nefarious activity in the higher orbits out at GEO with satellites manoeuvring and no one's quite clear on what they're doing and getting close to other operators. And clearly, other countries have made comment about that. There needs to be, I think, some underpinning understanding. So it would be good to see, I think, the MOD push forward on their space domain awareness program so they can start to see what's going on. And also, I think Airbus welcomes the work that the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, FCDO, are doing on norms of behaviour. The biggest risk, in my mind, will come about because we haven't understood what someone is doing. And that will lead to, some sort of reaction from another country. And clearly, I would like to think that nobody is advocating for any form of conflict or any more destructive behaviour in space. Because every time, you destroy a satellite or demonstrate that capability, it I think, causes all the operators significant alarm. And clearly, I can't really believe that they truly understand the damage it does then to the environment longer term, where bits of debris, even today, from the Chinese shoot down of 2007, still exists and continues to threaten spacecraft today.
Okay, and just to round off and to finish with, I've asked you to look into your crystal ball. I mean, what are the types of trends in space that we might be talking about in the next 5 to 10 years that might be significantly different, either from a technological point of view or otherwise?
The first trend that I think that I see is clearly the revolution that we've seen through, companies such as SpaceX and OneWeb, where the industrialization process has changed radically. We've shifted from satellites being manufactured over, a period of months and years into satellites being produced on a daily basis. All of that, I think, underpins this drive, I think, a need to be able to almost share information ubiquitously across the globe, supporting, the Internet of Things, supporting, future automation of cars, so driverless cars. All of that will require, I think, information coming from space, which I think is really exciting. And I think potentially that then will help us also tackle some of the challenges that we have, on Earth. It will be able to, I think, enable us to look at climate change differently. It will enable us to be able to work differently, even if you're, working remotely in some sort of northeast part of Scotland, where at the moment internet access is probably a challenge. You'll still now be able to interact almost seamlessly, with a colleague in London.
Okay, and in terms of the growth, in terms of market in space, I mean, it's obviously has the potential for disruptors to take a look and get involved. Would you see Airbus's, I guess, the potential for market share to change, or is it kind of, you're such a big company that nothing really will stand in the way of success and procuring big contracts?
So I think I might just pare back your question and focus on the UK. I think Airbus, understands its position within the UK market. And what we would really like to see is the UK market overall grow. And that needs us, I think, to be able, again, to work closely with government. So we are developing products here in the UK that can be utilised by UK government, but also, are going to want to be used by other countries. So therefore, we need to have, a very successful export programme. And I think if we can do that, then we can grow the size of the UK market, because there will be a bit of shift and change. As we look at what's happening, particularly in the US, where it's now quite disrupted. There's lots of significant changes happening, and we have to try and make the UK, the place for companies to come and do business, and a place from which, we can then be competitive on the global stage.
Alan, thanks so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure talking with you, and hopefully we can catch up and revisit some of those themes later in the year, perhaps, or beyond that.
Okay, thanks very much.
For over 40 years, Shephard has led the defence and aerospace sector with magazines, equipment handbooks, and cutting-edge news stories. Shephard now champions the best business information and marketing solutions across digital, so your business can have the decisive edge in everything you do. Make your team the competitive advantage. Partner with Shephard today. Get in touch with one of our customer experts to discuss your needs at shepherdmedia.com.
You have been listening to another episode of the Weekly Defense Podcast. As always, a big thanks to everyone who took the time to be part of the episode. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, make sure you like and subscribe and leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts from. You can also start a conversation or give us feedback joining the Global Defense Community Group on LinkedIn, a platform to interact with our team of journalists and analysts and discuss breaking news as it happens. Head over to shepherdmedia.com/Global Defense Community or search Global Defense Community on LinkedIn to join. Until next week, thanks for listening.